Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Savory Mac and Cheese Cake. That's right, I am very excited to share this new way to enjoy macaroni and cheese. And yes, we could have called it mac and cheese pie. But believe it or not, this idea was inspired by a mac and cheese pancake recipe that I saw on TV many years ago. On this show where this dude in sunglasses drives around the country in a convertible. So before we proceed, I would like to thank that guy. And to get started, the first thing we'll want to do is generously butter a cake pan. Plus, to hedge our bets, we'll also add a circle of parchment paper, which I cut out perfectly, thanks to a little something we call geometry. Oh yeah, Chef John knows how to figure out a radius. And that's it. Once our pan is prepped, we can move on to this extremely easy cake batter. And that's going to start with a generous amount of plain Greek-style yogurt. And by the way, even though I tested this a few times, there are still a couple things I might tweak the next time. So the amounts, like this yogurt for example, might be slightly different on the written recipe than I actually added here. So to summarize, just follow the written recipe, which will also call for 2 large eggs. And then we'll go ahead and season this up with some salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And then we'll also be tossing in a little bit of sugar, since after all it is a cake. And we'll also do a little bit of cayenne, since after all it is a cake. And then before we add the next set of ingredients, let's go ahead and take a whisk and give this a very thorough and thoughtful mixing. And in case you're wondering, I'm sure this would work with other forms of dairy, like milk for example. But I went with yogurt because I thought the tanginess would pair well with the cheese, which it really did. And then once we work that over with our whisk, we will go ahead and toss in our self-rising flour, which as you well know is the one that has the baking powder already in it. And as usual in the recipe, we will explain what to do if you're using all-purpose. But either way, next up we will add our cheese, which in my case is an extra sharp cheddar. Oh, and we're not adding all of it here, since we do want to save about an ounce or so for the top. And then once this has been cheesed, we'll go ahead and toss in some freshly sliced green onions. And then we'll take our spatula and give this a mix. And we will keep mixing until all that flour disappears, and we end up with a very thick batter. And normally I would tell you to use whatever kind of cheese you want, but I really do hope you use the extra sharp cheddar, which I think is absolutely key for any mac and cheese, even ones being presented in cake form. Oh, and if you're wondering, is it okay if I use one of those bags of pre-grated cheese? No, it is not, and it never is. So pick up something nice and grate it yourself. But anyway, at this point our batter is pretty much done and needs just 2 more ingredients. Some melted butter, and some cooked macaroni, which, since we've been very well trained, we're going to cook in boiling salted water, and not just a pinch of salt, like a couple tablespoons. And we will cook that about 30 seconds under whatever the package directions say, which for this said 5 minutes, so I went with 4:30. Although since we're making mac and cheese cake, I'm sure 4:20 would have been fine. And then very critical here, once our macaroni is cooked, we want to drain it, but not very well, as we do want this pasta fairly wet as we add it in. So what we'll do is quickly toss in our melted butter, and then immediately dump in our still very wet macaroni. And then we'll take a spoon or spatula and give everything a nice mix. And by the way, to make things a little more user-friendly, I think in the recipe, I'm going to tell you to save about a 1/4 cup of that pasta water to actually add into this batter once you add the macaroni. All right, like I said, it is fine if you drain it really quickly and then dump it right into this bowl. But my fear is some people will let it sit and drain for too long because they forgot to melt their butter or whatever. So by calling for the pasta water, we really don't have to worry about that factor. I mean, we don't want this batter too wet, since it still needs to hold everything together and actually form a cake. But we don't want things too dry either. So again, follow the advice in the recipe. And that's it. Once that's been mixed up, we'll go ahead and transfer that into our prepared pan, and we will distribute that as evenly as possible. And once that's been accomplished, we will even out the top before we do a couple final touches. The first of which would be to sprinkle over the rest of our cheddar cheese, our extra sharp cheddar cheese, as I continue to stress that point. And speaking of stressed points, before we bake this, I'm going to sprinkle over a little bit of cayenne, because I like it. And it always makes that browning that occurs on the top seem a little bit warmer and a little bit more inviting. And that's it. We are just one old tap away from putting this into the center of a 425-degree oven for about 25 minutes Or until our cake is set and the top is golden brown and it looks like this. And then you'll probably be able to tell this is done without testing it. But if we did want to test, we would do it the same way we do a cake, by seeing if a bamboo skewer comes out clean, which it did. And then in real life, surrounded by hangry people, feel free to just start cutting wedges and passing them out, hopefully next to a salad. But so I can take some pretty pictures, I decided to take mine out of the pan. So I went around with a knife to make sure it wasn't sticking. And once I was sure it wasn't, I flipped it over onto this pan. And I peeled off the parchment. And then I was going to flip it back over onto a plate and start garnishing. But then I remembered, I'm trying to win some awards. I forget which ones. But anyway, the point is I decided to go full cake stand. And I literally put this up on a pedestal and turned that to what I thought was the best side. And I decided to garnish the top with a few more freshly sliced green onions. Plus, in a major plot twist, some edible flowers. Oh yeah, these beautiful viola are completely edible. Whoops. Hold on, you're going to see what they look like eventually. All right, what was I saying? Oh yes, these are completely edible. And if you're asking me, absolutely gorgeous. And that's it, my now almost room temperature savory mac and cheese cake was ready to enjoy. So I went ahead and transferred that back onto a plate so I could cut a piece and serve it up without scratching my beautiful cake stand. And besides all the pictures, the other reason I wanted to try this at room temp is because that's usually how cakes are served. Although, like I already said, in real life, when you're starving, you probably want to eat this hot right out of the pan. But having said that, this really was very, very good at room temp. And yes, believe it or not, it tastes almost exactly like mac and cheese, if mac and cheese was a little bit like a cake. But definitely way closer to mac and cheese than a cake. And considering the fact all we had to do was mix everything up in a bowl and bake it, I will argue that the trade-off, where this is not exactly like mac and cheese, is probably well worth it. And I think the couple of small tweaks I'm going to do in the written recipe is going to make it even closer to actual mac and cheese. And in related news, one thing we could do that would be a major change would be to double all the ingredients so that this would bake up twice as tall, which would definitely make it look more cake-like, but might also make the texture more mac and cheese-like. But anyway, that's the kind of thing you could play around with. I mean, you are, after all, the Ferretti comma guy of how to adapt this mac and cheese cake that we could have called a pie. And as I ate this beautiful golden brown piece from the edge, I thought of a great way to describe the taste and texture of this. Okay, you know when you make a regular mac and cheese casserole, and you top it with the breadcrumbs, that as it cooks kind of fuse to that cheese on top, and it gets all beautifully golden brown and crusty? You know how that's one of your favorite parts? Well, this, my friends, is sort of like having an entire cake of that. All right, not exactly, but sort of. So I think I will make that my final pitch. Although before we finish up, one last thing. All right, you know that person in your life that just doesn't like sweets and never wants a cake for their birthday? Well, a slice of this just might work out perfectly. All right, just go ahead and stick a candle in the top, and you light it up, and everyone gets to sing happy birthday and pretends what's going on is not super weird. And then they make a wish and blow out the candle like I'm doing here. Oh, and if you're wondering why I'm holding the flower, it's because this is what happened on the first take. And what did I wish for, both times? That you would actually make this. Which is why I'm going to finish up by saying, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.